I'd like to start by welcoming you all to this, our next episode in the Open Networking webinar series. Today, we're looking at data center and service provider solutions with IP Infusion. My name is Ciara McCarthy. I'm the Global Marketing Director for EPS Global. Just to give you a bit of background on EPS, we're the open networking distributor of choice globally for a whole host of industries. So we sit at the center of the open networking ecosystem. So we bring together the hardware and the open network operating software, it's a bit of a tongue twister, together to create turnkey solutions for our customers. So we offer technical advice, configuration of software, and hardware bundles. That's your switches, optics, your cables, and more. We've been around for 20 years and we've 28 locations around the world, so we're never far away. So if I can introduce you to our speakers today. Okay, so Barry, he is our resident techie and he has a very deep knowledge of open networking. So Barry enjoys a pint of Guinness and he's an avid Celtic supporter. I'll let him speak for himself later, but he writes an excellent monthly blog that is worth checking out on our website at epsglobal.com. So moving on to our first speaker from IP Infusion, that's Craig Schaefer, and we're delighted to welcome Craig to our webinar today. Craig is a Senior Director for the Global Channels and Alliances with IP Infusion. He leads IP Infusion's partnership sales globally and has recently launched the company's new Partner Infusion program. Having been in technology sales for more than 20 years, Craig has previously held leadership positions at WeWork, Voyager Search, HPE, Schneider Electric, Nortel, and AT&T. Craig lives in LA in California, where I'm sure it's sunny there. It's not as sunny here today in Dublin. I'd also like to welcome William Graves, who is a Senior Solutions Engineer for Global Channels and Alliances for IP Infusion. William, you're very welcome today. William provides technical leadership and support for IP Infusion's ecosystem of partners. He spent 18 years at Cisco as a consulting systems engineer for software management and orchestration solutions. Most recently, William was at Telco Systems, where he was the lead technical resource for uCPE sales into service providers. He lives in the Dallas, Texas area. So I'll just a bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Barry there. So if you have any questions, just type them into the Q&A window of Zoom and we'll get to the questions at the end. And if there's anything that we don't cover today, we'll respond to you personally after the webinar. So I'll hand over to you, Barry.
Thanks, Ciara, for a lovely introduction. And thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon or this evening or this morning. I think we actually have attendees from Asia, Africa, India, Europe and America today. So we've pretty much covered the globe. So whatever time it is, we really appreciate you taking a time out of your day to join us. So my name is Barry. I'm a network engineer with EPS Global. So I'm going to cover the open networking ecosystem, and by that I mean where does the hardware come from, where are these service provider open networking solutions coming from, end-to-end solutions. Craig is going to have a look at the corporate overview from IPI. He's going to look at the trends like disaggregation and migration. He's going to look at DANOS Vyatta and the relationship with AT&T. Williams then is going to take us through the actual use cases. So we've the disaggregated cell site gateway or cell site router or Odyssey, or it's got lots of names. Virtual OLT, SD Edge, carrier Ethernet, open optical transport with the Cassini from EdgeCore, and then their data center solution. And we'll summarize and we'll take questions at the end. So, Ciara mentioned we're EPS Global. We're 21 years old this year, and we've been involved in open networking now since 2016. So that came about. We became distributors, global distributors for EdgeCore Networks. For anybody who doesn't know EdgeCore, they're a subsidiary of the Acton Group, who are an ODM, OEM out of Taiwan. Basically, if you've used a switch that's not Cisco, you've probably used an Acton Group switch. But pretty early in our relationship with EdgeCore, we realized that the normal rules of distribution don't apply to open networking. So we began evangelizing about all things open networking and talking to the software vendors. Not just some of the software vendors, all the software vendors, because they all have their own niche area. And this is how our relationship with IP Infusion blossomed, I suppose. We provide other services for our customers. So I think everybody loves the kind of disaggregation, capex savings, and no vendor lock-in of open networking. But then when it comes to it, they're a little confused about possibly who to get software off, who to get hardware off, who to get the transceivers off, cabling, so on and so forth. So we try and take that hassle out of open networking for our customers. We will load, for vendors and customers, we'll load software and licensing, bundle that with transceivers and cabling and DACs, and basically have the switches ready to slide into racks when they arrive in the customer's locations. Okay, so moving on to the actual hardware. So the hardware is obviously an important part of this. The guys are going to go through the software. So where does all the hardware starts with the Open Compute project. So the OCP were started in 2011, and the way it kind of works is any member can give in a hardware specification. So I'm going to imagine I'm giving in a 25 gig switch with 400 uplink ports. Okay, that's fine. So that hardware specification is accepted. Then companies like EdgeCore Networks will give in design files for that specification. If the design files are accepted, then EdgeCore will go off and they'll build that product. Once the product is accepted as an OCP accepted product, the EdgeCore will then release all the design information to the community. So they really are creating, similar to what the Linux community did, a kind of open, creative, collaborative effort all around hardware. Once the product is actually completed, it moves to the OCP marketplace, so you can view all the products. It's worth a look actually. You can view all the products that have been OCP certified on the website. There's integrated solutions as well, but more importantly I think than the integrated solutions are the relationship with the ONF and TIP. So this is where the real integrated solutions kind of take place, and I'm going to look at the two of these now. So the ONF, founded in 2011, I think it was a couple of months before the OCP, but they kind of started with the idea to extol the virtues of software-defined networking and open networking. Pretty much like what we did in 2016 when we started on this journey. 2012 they standardized the OpenFlow protocol. So OpenFlow was the first protocol that allowed for the separation of the control and data plane. There's lots more now. 2014 they released Open Networking Operating System, which is more of a controller now for their solutions. In 2016, this is important for our stuff with the service provider, and they begin work on their platform called Cord. So Cord is central office re-architected as a data center. For anybody that doesn't know what a central office is, it's kind of the last point of the service provider's network before they supply the residential enterprise broadband kind of stuff. But you've probably walked by multiple central offices and not known they're kind of earthquake-proof, grim buildings with maybe a camera on the front and some big fans on the back. But inside they house OLTs, broadband network gateways, routers, some backhaul stuff like transponders and switches and servers. So the idea was to redesign all of this using bare metal and open source. So 2019 they released their first reference designs. SIBA is software-enabled broadband access using OLTs and switches. Trellis is spine and leaf architecture within the central office. And ODTN is our open disaggregated transport network, and we're actually going to cover that when we look at the Telecom Infra project. 2020 was a big year, so they had production rollout with T-Mobile of OMAC. Trellis has been used in Comcast production network, and Turk Telecom with SIBA. And I think only for the pandemic, AT&T and Deutsche Telekom were pretty close to production of SIBA pods as well. So there's a bunch of other projects in field trials. So it's been, and just to give you some idea of the market size we're talking about here. So 650 Dynamics did recently released a report after speaking extensively to service providers. And if we look over here at the pie chart, obviously RAN, I don't know, that's not about 35%. We've RAN, broadband access service provider, optical transport, and Evolved Packet Core. So with just the projects from the ONF alone, 73 billion of that 490 billion is up for grabs. So primarily in the broadband access and optical transport, and that's just with the ONF. We're going to look now at the Telecom Infra project, where another heap of that 490 billion is up for grabs, hopefully. So Telecom Infra project. So Telecom TIP started again in 2016, around the same time as the ONF started their Cord platform. They work very closely with the ONF and the OCP. From the OCP side, all the hardware they use the majority of it comes from the OCP, is born in the OCP, starts life in the OCP. And as far as the ONF is concerned, a lot of their membership, I think, is made up of similar guys, so Deutsche Telekom, Telefonica, etc. And obviously, they don't want to be putting resources into two companies doing the same project, so they work closely in, there is overlap, but not too much overlap, which is the idea. So they've over 500 member organizations, we're members ourselves, and that's pretty impressive for a 4-year-old organization. And when you see the caliber of the organizations involved, it is pretty impressive. They also have a marketplace where you can view the products that are used in the end-to-end solutions called the Tip Exchange. And finally, they have 3 kind of distinct areas, project groups. So Access looks after all their RAN initiatives, like Open RAN or Open Cellular. 2 is Backhaul or Transport, looks after everything from the mast back to the core. And then the 3rd area is Core and Services, which looks after does some slicing and orchestration projects and things like that. So I just want to look at one project in particular, just to give you an idea of how far they've come in 4 years to producing end-to-end solutions. So if we look on the left-hand side, you have a user using a mobile phone, radio frequency picked up by the cell tower, down into the baseband unit, and now we have to get the packet back to the mobile core, so into the cell site gateway. So we have our cell site routers, which William will cover later on. So these were, again, born in the OCP, bare metal from UFI Space or from Edge Core with IP Infusion or DANOS Vyatta sitting on it. Into our aggregation routers, again, born in the OCP. Sounds like a song, born in the OCP. Again, Edge Core, bare metal Edge Core 5916, XKS, XL, with IP Infusion sitting on it. And then depending on distance, we have optical transponder, so the Cassini, muxed, amplified depending on distance, demuxed, and now we're back at our core. So now we have a bare metal or white box solution for an end-to-end solution, which I think is pretty impressive. So that's kind of a snapshot of where the hardware came from and how the ONF and the OCP and TIP are trying to produce end-to-end solutions. And now IPI will explain how they kind of fit into that ecosystem. So I'll hand you over to Craig. Thanks very much, guys.
All right, Barry, thank you.
No problem, Craig.
Yeah, it sounds like the audio was clipping a little bit there, so hopefully my audio is a little bit better. So let me know if we're still clipping, and we'll figure something out. So yeah, great. So thanks, Kira and EPS Global for just the opportunity to spend some time with you guys here today. So really appreciate you being here. And we're going to take you through kind of an update on IP Infusion and an update on what service providers are doing in the open networking space. It's been, just in the last 12 months, there's been a ton of changes relative to what's happening in the industry. And so we just wanted to kind of bring everybody up to speed and bring you up to speed with regard to what's happening at IP Infusion. So I am based here in Southern California, although Kira likes to dream about the fact that it might be warm and sunny here. It's not. It's what, a little after 8 a.m. in the morning, and it's gray outside, but it will be sunny in the afternoon. So that's good. We have that going for us. So a little bit about IPI. We've been in business 20 years, and a lot of people don't realize that. So many other open networking vendors have come about in, let's say, the last 5 years or so, but IPI has been around for 2 decades. And our founders were at the very forefront of everything that's been happening in open networking over the years. And our founders wrote the original Zebra OS code. And interesting fun fact that forked off into Quagga. And if you didn't know, Quagga is an extinct form of Zebra. So there you go. That's where Quagga come from. And that goes into free range routing, and then ultimately to where we're at today with our flagship product as a company, OcNOS, Open Compute Network Operating System, but also DANOS. And we'll talk a little about DANOS Vyatta Edition and what that means for everybody on the call today. So, Barry, why don't we just move on and ecosystem-wise, open networking is all about ecosystems, and we are engaged with a ton of players throughout the industry. So we'll start off in the bottom left with regard to all of the optics providers that we deal with on a regular basis. We deal with silicon merchant providers, or merchant silicon providers rather, on a regular basis to make sure that we've got the most open ecosystem and the most open hardware environments for our software to land on. And from a hardware provider perspective, that rings true. So Barry mentioned EdgeCore, one of several platforms on which we reside, but certainly one of the most strategic that we have in our portfolio. And we're clearly involved in all of the industry foundations that Barry was talking about, from OCPE to TIP, et cetera. And we'll talk a little bit again about DANOS. So just moving on. So, you know, I don't really want to get into the background of open networking. I think most people, if you're joining this call, you're familiar with what's happening in the industry, and it really kind of all started back when you know, telecommunications has really evolved from mainframe type of environments to the server environment. And x86, you know, if you've got a box, the ability to load a Windows operating system or a Linux operating system on that box. I mean, disaggregation has happened, you know, in the x86 architecture for a long time, and move that into the data center, where, you know, we really got away from having to have a proprietary solution in the data center, and white box has been, you know, prevalent in the data center for quite some time. But now we're really moving towards the service provider part of the network, and it's really creating quite a bit of opportunity and quite a bit of innovation on the service provider side, from software-defined networking to network function virtualization, NFV. You know, all of these things are playing strongly into our hand as we focus on the service provider solutions going forward. So Barry, if you could. So just some additional market trends. You know, 5G obviously is creating a bunch of new opportunity for MNOs and for consumers alike. And as demand for 5G takes off, that creates a tremendous amount of pressure on the network. Public cloud adoption, I think that goes for itself. I mean, enterprises have been really looking to, how do I get to the cloud as quickly as possible? How do I analyze the workloads that I'm taking for both my in-house network, my on-prem network, as well as my cloud network, and what I'm putting off into the cloud? And I have to make sure that I'm making the right decisions there. And then again, from an SDN perspective, really what people are landing on is the fact that hybrid networking is really where the sweet spot for our industry is going to lie. And how do you manage that? How do you create the right network environment to take advantage of all of the options that you have there? And I'm just kind of looking through the comments as we go here. So is just a little check here. If the audio is okay, just let me know in the comments, and we'll keep going forward. So Barry, if you could. The audio
is perfect now, Craig. Yeah, it's great.
Okay. Excellent. So, excellent. So, you know, disaggregation being the key to open networking, I think that speaks for itself. I mean, open networking is all about how do you manage the best of breed, the best options available to you. So you could take advantage of advances in media and other parts of the network, and really optimize your hardware and your management and control plane to make sure that you've got all the facets of your network operating optimally to achieve the solutions that you're trying to achieve. And that's what open networking does. And IPI, because we've been in the business for 20 years, we've been creating feature sets for networking longer than anybody else, quite frankly, in the open networking space. So we came to, our core business for the last, I'd say from the first decade of our existence, was all about how do we provide protocol stacks. So if you're a network equipment manufacturer and you wanted to add MPLS as a feature to your product, you could go hire people, code that in-house, or you could come to a vendor like IPI and you could buy that protocol stack and incorporate it into your product. So we've been doing this for 20 years. As a result of all that development over time, our Open Compute Network Operating System, or OcNOS, has come to be the most fully featured open networking NOS in the industry. So Barry, if we can move on. So why do you do this? I mean, you know, if you're on the call, you're considering open networking, you're considering IP Infusion perhaps in partnership with EPS Global, and you do it because number one, open networking has this promise of CapEx savings. You can buy your optimized hardware from vendor A, you can buy your optimized software, your network operating system from vendor B, and you know any other components, be it optics, et cetera, from other vendors, and you can really put this best of breed solution, and you can buy it at price points that are different than what you could buy from a proprietary vendor, a legacy vendor, if you will. And so that CapEx savings is obvious. But the OpEx saving is oftentimes overlooked. And I think it's one of the strengths of IP Infusion in that, because we're not just selling point solutions in the network, we're really providing what I would call architectures. We're selling architectures because we've got so many diverse use cases that William will talk to in just a moment. But because of that diverse set of use cases, that provides the opportunity to deploy a common NOS across your infrastructure and really gain those efficiencies of both, you know, let's say training and sparing and things like that. All of those things come to the fore. And now we're talking about an equation in terms of economics that results in both CapEx and OpEx savings, which is really kind of, you know, a different perspective for open networking, I think. So next slide. So as I said, we're really talking about selling solutions and not just point products. So as a team of IP Infusion and EPS Global, we really consult with our clients and really understand what's the use case, what's the solution we're trying to tackle. And from there, we select the hardware, the best of breed hardware, be it optics and or, you know, white box. And then we really talk about the features and the software that we need to deploy. And we've got some different options in terms of open networking NOSes that we can deploy. And then together with EPS, you know, one of the things about open networking has been that, you know, if I'm a consumer of this technology and I have to go out and procure hardware over here, and I have to go procure software over here, and then I have to support it somehow without having to do this and point the finger at each other, I really want that one person that I can go to and get support from. That's where the value of a partner like EPS Global comes in with IP Infusion, that we can procure all of the facets of your solution from a single vendor, and then make it happen for you from a support perspective, so that you've got that trust, security, that risk aversion that people are sometimes looking at when it comes to open networking, and we've got you covered on that front. So very final slide here, I believe. Last thing about IP Infusion, this is an update. This happened in the fall of last year, so I wanted to make sure that everyone is clear on what's going on. I said that IP Infusion's flagship product was Open Compute Network Operating System, or OcNOS. AT&T and IPI partnered in the fall of last year, whereby IPI would be the exclusive worldwide distributor of the DANOS Vyatta Edition software. So DANOS stands for Disaggregated Network Operating System from AT&T. This is a product that came from originally out of Vyatta, which was Vyatta was purchased by Brocade, and when those Brocade assets were being looked at by Broadcom, it was spun off, and AT&T wound up with those assets, and they created the DANOS software. So DANOS is open networking in that it is hosted by the Linux Foundation. You can go out there today and download DANOS software. And then IPI, we offer the DANOS Vyatta edition of that. So if you're familiar with you know, this type of solution, it's one where the DANOS available to download for free, you've got that. You can absolutely do that today. But if you want the hardened, curated, supported version of that software, you would get it from IPI and our partners. And that's what we do with DANOS Vyatta Edition software. And a DANOS Vyatta Edition, or DVE as it will be referred to throughout the remainder of the presentation, is something that AT&T is consuming in their own network, deploying more than 60,000 cell site routers in their own network. And it's got other use cases as well that we'll talk about. So Barry, one more. All right, so that's in conclusion, that really leaves us with the two operating systems that IPI goes to market with today, which is number one, the DANOS Vyatta Edition from AT&T, and there's a number of use cases involved there, but the two primary ones that we're focused on are cell site router, or DCSG, Disaggregated Cell Site Gateway, and the uCPE, what we call here at IPI Open SD Edge, and William's going to talk to those things in particular, and then OcNOS as well, where we cross a number of use cases with OcNOS. Again, with that 20-year heritage of IPI, it really comes to bear with regard to OcNOS being what we believe is the most fully featured open network operating system in the industry. And so you can kind of see the use cases there. So the next slide is a transition slide as I pass it off to William to take you through the various use cases. This is a helpful slide, and I look forward to everybody getting these slides after the call today. But this kind of breaks down the use cases where IP Infusion plays, but also the network operating system that we would recommend when it comes to those various use cases, be it universal CPE or VoLT, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's really where we're going here. And so as I toss it off to William, and we'll come back and summarize things, that's a little bit of an update as to where IPI is going. Barry's done a great job of outlining where open networking is today and where EPS is playing. And really, now let's talk about how we dig in with some of these network operating systems and solve some of the solutions that service providers and data center people are looking for. And with that, I'll toss it over to William. William, over to you, sir. I think you're muted, William. No, still muted.
That better?
There you go.
All right, so yeah, once again, we get bitten by the headset manufacturers. Kara, I hate to tell you, it's not sunny in Dallas. We're taking a break from the heat engine that usually kicks in this time of year, so we have showers today. So actually, it's a little humid, but quite pleasant compared to what it normally is.
Makes us feel better here.
I'm extremely excited to talk to the EPS and the folks here joining the webinar. I've been at IP Infusion only a couple of months, and it seems like a couple of years already with all the different things that we have going on from a use case perspective. And I guess kind of want to take a segue on this and kind of talk about our capabilities. And we're going to go from the access to the core. We have a lot of things going on in the access, and I think the addition of the DANOS the DANOS software has brought us some unique capabilities that bring us into the realm of CPE, which is not an area that IP Infusion has typically been in. And what's unique about that particular piece of software, the Open SD Edge, is that it's sort of this really Swiss Army knife type deployment, in the sense that it can be a vRouter on one day, a bare metal white box router on another day, and with an upgrade, a universal CPE on the day after that, which makes it a very interesting product. What's unique about that is that from both the data center as well as the access, I have the same operational experience in terms of bringing things together from an end user perspective. And the universal CPE access just allows me to extend that with whatever third-party DNF that customers want to run today. A lot of those being things like SD-WAN and next generation firewall, where people are starting to consolidate their appliances into one single hardware platform and running those applications as NFV-based applications in the network, offering them a considerable amount of flexibility they didn't have before. So we're really excited about the Open SD Edge and where we're going to go with that with the DANOS Vyatta software. And then later this year, we're going to be bringing a PON solution to the market. It's also virtualized, and it's virtualized in two ways. One, sort of a chassis-based solution and a pluggable solution. So we'll get into that. And then our overlap at the CSR level with both DBE and OcNOS gives us a plethora of options to go into the cell site market with. And we'll talk about some of those requirements as we move forward. And IPI's disaggregated tradition primarily starts from the data center on out. So, we still have our CLOS technology that we can bring forth in the data center, and IXP peering technology that we've been focused on as well. So as Craig says, is that, in a fairly short period of time, we've gone to offering point solutions to architectures, particularly when we start to add in some of the disaggregated optical functionality that we want to bring to the table or are bringing to the table at current. So Barry, as you move to the next slide, we'll get into that. I thought I'd start off with the cell site router use case, since it seems to be pretty top of mind of most people. And sort of the way to look at this is as follows. You see changes happening in a lot of the radio architectures, the RAN architectures that are happening in the network based on 5G. And, you start off with your typical classical architecture, which is sort of everything in, sort of one integrated BBU unit. And you just simply have backhaul of the protocols back to the mobile core. And there, that's a pretty known architecture. It started off as 1 gig, then it went to 10 gig. And if you're talking rings now, it's probably moved up to 100 gig because the bandwidths are for LTE and the amount of data people are using has been steadily increasing. But with 5G, what you see is a lot more disaggregation, if you will, of the RAN itself. And this kind of starts off into where we have an integrated, we have disconnected unit for the radio, a distributed unit, and a central unit. And those are disaggregated from one another, meaning they're distributed. Now, with the proprietary vendors, a lot of those things are set up to where all those pieces belong to those vendors. Most of the folks who are deploying these things are kind of in that distributed cloud RAN area where the RU and the DU are this sort of proprietary pair, if you will. And then you have a mid-band type of architecture and a backhaul architecture that sort of kind of comes out of that. And from that, what you see is the need to put a CSR in to address the bit haul and the backhaul based architectures. And if you continue to extend that where the radio units become disaggregated, you now start to add these front haul architectures as well. Each one of these brings a different set of requirements. While the interface requirements are fairly similar in terms of being 10, 25, 50, and 100 gig, the latency requirements and the timing requirements really get pretty tight. And if you bring in the radio piece, you get into this whole issue of needing to deal with CPRI, eCPRI, and radio over Ethernet. So our current solution is focused on primarily on the mid-haul and the backhaul areas. In the mid-haul areas, we can address the latencies that are down between 1 and 5 milliseconds, and the backhaul, those are typically less than 20 milliseconds. But more importantly, we can handle the timing requirements, which used to be around 15 to 20 nanoseconds. Now those are moved down to 1 to 5 nanoseconds. And that means that, these deployments really haven't changed in terms of their topology. What has changed is the fact that you're now pushing these things closer and closer to the radios. So we support the traditional topologies. We're using the TIP vernacular. So, we have our base topology, which is basically operating the CSR as a router, sort of a customer edge, if you will, in a dual home, IP MPLS network or any other network. We can just simply dual home the routing piece, because the focus here is primarily on the routing protocols needed to interconnect back to the PE. But we've also focused a set of requirements to where we can handle the additional service and transport requirements needed to deploy this thing as a provider edge router, so we can actually cover the PESW or MPLS profile from the tip. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So I talked about earlier, we have our virtual OLT, and what's unique about this particular setup is that if you look at what's happening in the industry, we're migrating from these sort of chassis-based legacy solutions to more of a distributed solution. And distributed is not only in terms of where the particular hardware can sit, but it's also distributed in terms of the software. So basically you can have an OLT offering either from a chassis or from a pluggable, all managed by the same OLT control plane, which is virtually deployed either perhaps in an aggregation switch or maybe even in a data center. And then that kind of flows into the other disaggregation that's happening here with the BNG and the virtual router as well. So you see a complete disaggregation, if you will, upon architecture. So you no longer are geographically bound to the big chassis, that you basically can distribute the PON across a number of geographies that make the most sense for you, but also operate this thing sort of as a central kind of distributed mechanism, but operated at a centralized node, if you will. Next slide. Our OpenSD Edge, as I talked about before, we sort of have 3 use cases if we look at it specifically from the branch office perspective. One of those is just a standard white box branch office type of mechanism, and I don't want to call it an integrated access router, but that's sort of what it is. But this is white box based, so now you buy yourself an x86, uCPE, or if you want to host it on one of your internal servers in the branch, you could do that as well. And now you have your access routing. You have the option of pushing that out into a data center and maybe positioning a very simple NID, if you will, on the customer prem, and running that particular virtual function in the data center itself. And then last but not least, where you see a lot of folks moving to is this the idea of a universal platform to host all of my branch applications. And that's the uCPE. Next slide, please. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up good old-fashioned carrier Ethernet. I hate to call it old-fashioned, but I guess at this day and age, it is sort of old-fashioned in the sense that it's tried and true. This is the bread and butter of the service provider networks in terms of a lot of their deployments and a lot of their transport. And we have a full offering both from the access, the aggregation, and all the way to the core, if you will, where we're not really playing in the core, but we're playing from the edge all the way out to the access for VPLS-based layer 2 VPN transport. Also, we support things like 8032 rings as well with the full OAM suites that are typically required for these types of deployments. Next slide, please. I think, the use case, one of the use cases that Barry outlined was the Cassini. And what we try to do is take one slide and show you all these use cases, because it's kind of really a unique technology, given that we can kind of break things up. And that is, we can kind of match the optics in this type of technology for the required transport distance. So let's say we only want to go somewhere in a metro that's very short. We can use maybe a PAM4 QFP28, which will get us up to about 80 clicks. Or, we can start to move into more of a digital architecture like a DCO, which will give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of distance. Or we can start to look at going long haul, which is more of a ACO type architecture from the optics. And those distances can be in the thousands of miles with amplification, et cetera. And what you see here is a very flexible, very interesting architecture that I can basically match my optics to my application. And that has a lot of power in terms of simplifying the cost per bit and lowering the cost per bit. And this kind of tied into the rest of our architectures when we started looking at it from a data center perspective or a service provider backhaul perspective, because from a data center perspective, we do have a data center offering. So, you could use one of our offerings to build a data center and then use another offering to interconnect those data centers. And in the backhaul, we could actually move into the same type of setup for the cell site router, et cetera, so forth and so on. And I see some of the questions you guys are asking. I think we can meet those at the end. I think they're very interesting questions as we move forward. I'll move on to the next slide. And I want to move into the data center here. We talked about our traditional spine and leaf architecture, which is the typical 3-tier type architecture, and how we can interact that architecture with our DCI architecture. One of the things that closes into this with our work with DVE is that as a virtual router, we can deploy that router into the data center. So now it also gives us a multi-cloud interworking technology. So I can have the interworking between different virtual private clouds, between a virtual private cloud and a public cloud, and then between the public cloud and maybe even a customer prem type device, whether that device is in the data center or on premise. So you have the same operational experience across interworking these different clouds. So if you want to run a VPN between these various different locations, you'd have the same experience in deploying that particular VPN. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it back over to Craig, and that way we'll have a little more extra time to answer the questions that I see on here, and we'll let Craig summarize everything up.
Yeah, well, gotta love the marketing slide to conclude things. But Yeah, I mean, look, this is, William's done a great job of kind of outlining the various use cases that IPI is involved in, and that we'd love to have conversations around in conjunction with EPS. But at the end of the day, this is all about deploying best of breed solutions and cost savings. And really, when I say cost savings, I mean total cost of ownership savings. And I think we've kind of hammered that point home a little bit here today. I think when you look at IP Infusion, it's really about the history that this company brings, the 2 decades of leadership in open networking, and what that 2 decades worth of development brings is the most fully featured network operating system, open networking operating system to the market. And when you have the most fully featured network operating system, that allows you to get deployed in a diverse set of use cases that William just ran through. And when you're deployed in a diverse set of use cases, now you're starting to talk about the same technology being deployed across the network, which now results in OpEx savings. And that's a tremendous value that I think IPI brings to the table. So with that, Kira, I don't know how you want to do this. Do you want me to facilitate the Q&A, or would you like to do that, or would Barry like to do it? I'm not sure.
You can go ahead. I think Barry just had 1 or 2 more slides quickly to run through, and then we were going to jump on to the questions.
Perfect.
Because I think we have 2 really interesting questions there. So Barry, I'll leave it to you.
Grant, well, just to finish up, we've upcoming webinars, data center automation with Apstra, Pluribus Networks on their Fabric and their new monitoring solution, Pika 8 on campus, and then we're going to have a live Q&A in October. We also have some good information on our website. So blogs I've written, white box products for the carrier networks, stuff on tips, stuff on OCPE, fabrics, so on and so forth. You can have a look there. But I think, yeah, we can go on and we can take the questions now. I can't see them here, so if you want to call them out, Kira, or...
Yeah, no problem. So the first one was from Dan Pitt, and it was, could you build the PON bridge with an all optical switch or interconnect?
Do you want to take that one, William?
That's an interesting question. So I think the way I'd like to describe it is that when we look at these distributed PON architectures, we can kind of mix and match a few different things. So traditionally, if you had a PON cabinet, et cetera, so forth, you're kind of stuck in the chassis. Here you have the option to use things like DWDM transport to extend out to your virtualized PON. Because remember, you're running your controller separate from where those chassis are. So you can actually distribute the PON in sort of very interesting ways. And if I understand your question correctly, there are ways that you could backhaul, let's say a wavelength, for example, for let's say a PON location that may be in some remote area that could be mixed and matched with things that are coming in on traditional fiber into your overall PON deployment. Does that make sense? And hopefully I got that right.
Yeah. Kira, is there any more? I can't see.
Yeah, there was another one. Yeah. So Dan, we can also follow up after if there's any other questions you have related to that. So Matthias asked, do you know some case that uses uCPE or vCPE with XPON network, GPON, XGS-PON, or TWDM-PON?
I am dying to go find an XGS-PON use case, because one of the exciting things about the pluggables that we have is there's also an ONU that's a pluggable from the same company, which is called Tibit. So as we are in the uCPE business here, we would love to work with you to identify such use cases. I do believe they will happen. I think it's just going to depend upon the deployment topology in the metro as to whether or not, the particular provider wants to connect via PON or use a traditional fiber Ethernet type technology. But if you think you have a use case, please shoot me an email. I'd love to work with you on it.
Right. Were there any other questions there from anybody? I think that is it. We've just got thank yous coming in there. So yeah, I mean, thank you everybody for joining us today. I think our speakers were excellent, even if I do say so myself. What we're going to do is we're going to send out the slides after this and also the recording. But what we're going to do is try and fix up some of the audio issues that Barry was having there at the start before we send it out to you. So it'll just be a few days before we get that to you. So and any other questions that, you know, after you digest this, if you have any other questions, just shoot them over to Barry there. He can share them with Craig and William. His details are on screen there. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Have a nice day.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Cheers, guys. All the best.
Bye.